April 15th, 1945, Lower Saxony. British and Canadian troops walk into Bergen-Belsen and find tens of thousands barely alive and thousands of bodies in the mud. Typhus spreads by the hour. Food kills as quickly as hunger. The cameras don't stop. What happens to the women and men who ran this place? What does justice look like in hell? The 11th Armored Division of the British Army, under the command of Brigadier Glyn Hughes, enters the camp through a local truce. This agreement, brokered with Wehrmacht officers on April 12th, declared the area around the camp a neutral zone to prevent the spread of typhus. The Germans feared the epidemic more than the advancing army. What the British soldiers found was worse than any battlefield. They find approximately 60,000 prisoners inside, most starving and gravely ill. Over 13,000 corpses lie unburied, rotting in the open air and stacked in mass graves. The scale of the humanitarian crisis was unprecedented. The Royal Army Medical Corps, including the 113th Light Field Ambulance, immediately set up a triage system. They established a massive human laundry to delouse survivors with DDT powder. Water had to be brought in by the thousands of gallons. The medical teams discover that feeding the starving is a science in itself. A piece of chocolate or a tin of bully beef given in kindness could induce fatal refeeding syndrome, killing the very people they were trying to save. They devised a special diet, starting with a watery soup, to slowly reintroduce nutrition. In the weeks that follow, despite these efforts, another 14,000 prisoners will die from disease and the effects of starvation. The British burn the camp huts to the ground with flamethrowers to kill the lice that carry typhus. The investigation begins at once amidst the chaos of saving lives. 45 former SS staff, camp guards, ARG, and prisoner functionaries, known as kapos, are arrested and held for trial. Simultaneously, the Army Film and Photographic Unit, including Sergeant Mike Lewis, was ordered to document everything. Their footage, shot on silent black and white film, was not for entertainment. It was evidence. The cameramen captured the bulldozers pushing thousands of bodies into mass graves, the skeletal survivors, and the captured guards being forced to confront their work. This film would not only be shown in the courtroom at Lüneburg, but would also be screened for the German public, a stark counter-narrative to any claims of ignorance. The interrogations of the captured staff, conducted by the British Army's War Crimes Investigation Team, start within days of the liberation. The proceedings began on September 17th, 1945, in a converted gymnasium at number 30 Lindenstrasse in Lüneburg, Germany. It was a British military tribunal, not an international court. The laws applied were derived from the Royal Warrant of June 14th, 1945, and international conventions like the Hague Convention of 1907. The case was officially called the Trial of Joseph Kramer and 44 others. The defendants sat in the dock in numbered positions. The prosecution was led by a team of 5 military lawyers, headed by Colonel T.M. Backhouse. Every defendant pleaded not guilty to the charges, which were read in both English and German. A complex system of headphones provided simultaneous translation into Polish as well, for the many survivors testifying. The trial lasted 54 days, covered by over 100 international journalists who sent the evidence to the wider world, shaping the global understanding of the concentration camp system. A key legal challenge came from the defense, who argued that their clients had broken no German laws and were being tried under retroactive justice. Colonel Backhouse countered that the laws of war and basic humanity had been violated, creating a duty for any civilized nation to intervene and prosecute. The central figure was Joseph Kramer, the camp commandant, number 1 in the dock. He was known as the Beast of Belsen. Kramer had previously been the commandant at Auschwitz-Birkenau, where he oversaw the gassing of hundreds of thousands of Hungarian Jews in the summer of 1944. He arrived at Belsen in December 1944. Witnesses testified that Kramer was personally involved in selecting prisoners for the gas chambers at Auschwitz. One survivor, Dr. Ada Bimko, recalled Kramer standing on the platform as trains arrived, directing people to the left or to the right. At Belsen, the prosecution argued his deliberate inaction and gross mismanagement directly caused the deaths of thousands from starvation and disease. On March 1st, 1945, Kramer himself wrote a report to his superiors asking for help, stating that 250 to 300 inmates were dying each day from typhus. Help never came. He remained in the camp when the British arrived and, astonishingly, gave Brigadier Glyn Hughes a guided tour of the horrors. He showed no remorse, only a sense of administrative frustration. In the witness box, Kramer described himself as a simple official, overwhelmed by circumstances beyond his control. Then there was Irma Grace, defendant number 9, an SS Officerin, a female supervisor, only 21 years old at the time of the liberation. Survivors called her the King Hyena of Auschwitz. Testimony painted a picture of profound cruelty. A French doctor, Ada Bimco, testified that Gracie would beat prisoners with a plaited cellophane whip, often until they were unconscious. A survivor named Luba Trzynska stated that Grace's dog, a German shepherd, was trained to attack inmates on her command. Multiple witnesses accused her of taking sadistic pleasure in shootings and selecting the weakest women for the gas chambers during her time at Auschwitz, Ilona Stein. Another survivor testified that Gracie tied two girls together and then beat them. She was implicated in dozens of specific murders. During the trial, she remained defiant and cool. She claimed she was just following orders, that the beatings were part of camp discipline, and she denied ever carrying a pistol. Her youth and appearance were noted by journalists, who contrasted her looks with the depravity of her alleged actions. Dr. Fritz Klein, defendant number 6, the camp doctor, was another prominent figure, an ethnic German from Romania. Klein had also served at Auschwitz before transferring to Belsen in mid-January 1945. He was photographed by the British standing in a mass grave, an image that became a defining picture of the Holocaust's horror. He was charged with criminal neglect and participating in selections for the gas chambers. Survivors testified that he showed a complete lack of concern for the sick and dying, often kicking inmates to see if they were still alive. When questioned by a British officer on how he reconciled his actions with the Hippocratic Oath, Klein famously stated, "My Hippocratic Oath tells me to cut a gangrenous appendix out of the human body. The Jews are the gangrenous appendix of mankind." In court, his defense was that he was powerless to stop the deaths. He had no medicine, no food, no staff. The prosecution presented evidence that he had made no significant effort to improve sanitation or care for the sick. The trial also exposed the roles of Kramer's deputies. Franz Hustler. Defendant number 4, Dirks was the deputy commandant of the women's camp. His career tracked the evolution of the Nazi killing machine, Dachau in 1940, Auschwitz in 1941, and finally Belsen. At Auschwitz, witnesses placed him at the selections for the gas chambers and at the crematoria. One survivor, Dora Silberberg, testified that Hustler forced a group of Greek women to undress before driving them into the gas chamber himself. He was also accused of throwing gas cans into the chambers at Auschwitz. At Belsen, he was accused of shooting female prisoners. Under cross-examination, Hustler admitted to being present at gassings but denied taking an active role, claiming his job was merely to keep records. Other defendants revealed the camp's twisted hierarchy. Elisabeth Volkenrath, defendant number 5, had been a senior Officerin at Auschwitz before coming to Belsen. Survivors testified she conducted brutal internal examinations, looking for hidden valuables, and beat women mercilessly during roll calls. One witness said Volkenrath threw a woman to the ground and kicked her to death for picking up a turnip peel. She was also accused of selecting thousands for the gas chambers. In court, she denied everything. She claimed she never beat anyone and was only responsible for distributing food. Peter Weingartner, defendant number 15, an SS block leader, was accused of numerous acts of brutality. A survivor named Dora Safran testified that she saw Weingartner shoot a Russian prisoner of war for stealing potatoes. Another witness claimed Weingartner beat a man to death with a rubber truncheon. He, too, claimed he was just a subordinate following the orders of Commandant Kramer. The system also turned prisoners against each other. Stanisława Starostka, a Polish inmate, was a capo, a prisoner functionary. She was accused by fellow survivors of savage beatings. One witness claimed Starostka beat a woman so badly for taking a piece of bread that the woman died days later. She was known as Stania the Beater. Her defense was one of duress. She argued that if she'd not obeyed the SS and enforced discipline, she would have been killed herself. The court had to weigh the reality of survival in the camps against the testimony of extreme cruelty. This demonstrated the moral complexities the tribunal faced. If you value documented World War II and post-war history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Now back to the story. The evidence was overwhelming, and much of it came from the mouths of those who had endured the camps. The court heard from survivors who identified their tormentors in the dock, sometimes from only a few feet away. They saw thousands of feet of film shot by the British Army Film and Photographic Unit. They saw still photographs that documented the piles of skeletal bodies. Harold Ladrilnek, a 44-year-old schoolteacher from the British Channel Island of Jersey, and the only British survivor of Bergen-Belsen, gave powerful testimony. He had been arrested in 1944 for helping his sister shelter an escaped Russian prisoner. Ladrilnek described his journey through 3 concentration camps, ending in Belsen, which he called the nadir, the lowest, the ultimate in degradation. He told the court, "There was no food, no water, no work of any sort, no hope. The real business of the camp was dying." His account of cannibalism, of prisoners cutting flesh from the dead to survive, stunned the courtroom into silence. The defense for most was simple. They were only following the orders of their superiors. A defense known as Befehl ist Befehl. An order is an order. Joseph Kramer argued he had done his best under impossible conditions created by Allied bombing of supply lines. Irma Grace's sister, Helene, testified as a character witness, claiming Irma was a timid girl who could not have committed such acts. The court was not persuaded. The prosecution countered that these orders were so illegal and morally repugnant that they should have been disobeyed. A soldier, Colonel Backhouse argued, has a duty to disobey an order to commit a war crime. On November 17, 1945, the verdicts were delivered. The court president, Major General H. P. M. Bernie Ficklin, read each verdict for each defendant. It took nearly 2 hours. Of the 45 defendants, 30 were found guilty on one or more charges. 11 were sentenced to death by hanging. These included Joseph Kramer, Irma Grace, Fritz Klein, Elizabeth Volkenrath, Franz Hössler, and Johanna Bormann. 18 others received prison sentences. Stanisława Starostka, the capo, received 10 years. Peter Weingartner received 15. Life sentences were given to others. One defendant, Ladislaw Gura, was sentenced to death, but his sentence was later commuted to life. 16 were acquitted. A result that surprised many German observers who expected automatic guilty verdicts. The acquittals of defendants like Ilse Lothe and Georg Kraft demonstrated that the tribunal was operating on a standard of evidence, requiring a direct link between the accused and a specific crime. Not merely seeking revenge for their presence in the camp. For many of those sentenced to prison, however, justice would be short-lived. By the mid-1950s, as a gesture of goodwill towards the new West German state, Britain paroled many of the Belsen convicts. Stanisława Starostka was released in 1950, having served only 5 years of her 10-year sentence. December the 13th, 1945, Hamelin Prison. The executions were performed by Albert Pierrepoint, the most famous hangman in Britain. He was flown to Germany specifically for this purpose, accompanied by his assistant, Regimental Sergeant Major O'Neill. The procedure was precise and methodical. The condemned were held in cells near the execution chamber. The gallows was a modern design, built to allow for a long drop which ensured a swift death by cervical fracture. The condemned were hanged one by one. The women went first, a procedural choice. Irma Grace was executed at 10 o'clock in the morning. She was 22 years old. The youngest person to be hanged under British law in the 20th century. Reports from the time say her last word, spoken to the executioner in German, was Schnell. Quickly, Elizabeth Volkenrath, aged 36, followed Grace to the gallows. She was hanged at 10:16. Then came Johanna Bormann, a 52-year-old guard known for her cruelty, executed at 10:38. The men followed. Joseph Kramer was hanged at 12:11 in the afternoon. He walked to the gallows without saying a word. Dr. Fritz Klein was hanged shortly after. Franz Hössler was among the last of the men to be executed that day. In total, 13 people were hanged, the 11 from the Belsen trial and 2 other German war criminals convicted in a separate case. Pierrepoint used the long drop method, designed to cause instantaneous death by breaking the neck. Each drop was calculated based on the prisoner's height and weight, recorded in his logbook. The entire process was completed with what was described as cold technical efficiency, a bureaucratic end to bureaucratic murderers. The bodies of the 13 executed war criminals were placed in simple wooden coffins and buried in the yard of Hamelin Prison. The graves were unmarked. The Belsen trial was the first major war crimes tribunal conducted by the Allies and set a crucial legal precedent for the larger Nuremberg trials, which began just 3 days after the Belsen verdicts were read. It was a landmark case for prosecuting crimes against humanity and for holding individuals accountable for their actions, regardless of orders. For decades, the final resting place of the Belsen guards was a simple, anonymous patch of ground inside a prison. In 1954, as part of post-war reconciliation efforts, and because the prison was being returned to German control, the bodies were disinterred. They were moved to a nearby cemetery on a hill called Am Vale. For over 30 more years, they lay there, still under nameless markers in a dedicated plot. It was not until 1986 that small, individual stone plaques were finally laid on the graves. They are flat, level with the grass, designed to be unobtrusive. The stone for Joseph Kramer gives only his name and dates. The one for Irma Grace reads simply, Irma Grace, 1923, 1945. There's no mention of their crimes, no list of their victims. There's only the cold fact of a name on a stone.